Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest today is Margaret Kimberley. She is a writer, an activist, and she is also the executive editor of the Black Agenda Report. Welcome back, Margaret.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
So, Margaret, during all this time, there's been a lot of discussion about Israel and Gaza and the genocide that's going on in Gaza. And one of the requests that has come from some of my audience members is to talk about the genocide that is happening in the Congo, which it seems like a lot of people are not aware of this. There was actually this article that was published by Human Rights Watch. This was February of 2023. They said the DR Congo, atrocities by Rwanda-backed M23 rebels. And they said here, the Rwanda-backed M23 armed group has committed summary executions and forced recruitment of civilians in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. Human Rights Watch said today the Congolese army is responding to the M23's offensive by collaborating with ethnic militias with abusive records. So I guess if we could start from the beginning, because some people may not even be aware, first of all, who exactly is the Rwanda M23 Rebels? And how does this genocide that's taking place in the Congo compare to what's happening in Gaza?
Well, the genocide in Congo, actually, I'm glad you asked, is one that's been going on for decades. You know, back in the early O's, an estimated 6 million Congolese died. It was never framed properly. It was always just, the way African nations are described as nations that just can't control themselves, that can't run their own affairs. But the role of Uganda and Rwanda is something that's rarely discussed, and that's because they work on behalf of the U.S. Uganda and Rwanda both border Congo, Eastern Congo, the mineral-rich part of the country. Congo has every resource that the world needs: gold, copper, coltan, cobalt, which are especially important in the use of electronics. But the United States and other nations don't want Congo to be independent. And this goes back to its nominal independence from Belgium and Patrice Lumumba's desire for his country to be truly independent. So there has always been interference in the affairs of Congo to make sure that these resources would be available. Lumumba wanted to nationalize these resources. Well, of course, they didn't like that. So now what they have done, and I'm generalizing, but Uganda and Rwanda have this M23 is this militia, but it's really paid for by those two countries. They regularly invade Eastern Congo. They make sure they claim these minerals for themselves, and they make sure that corporations in the US or Europe or China have easy and cheap access to these resources. And Uganda and Rwanda both get a lot of aid from the US and Europe. And I'm going to digress a little bit here. The UK has even paid Rwanda millions of dollars to take asylum seekers off their hands. People seek asylum in the UK. UK doesn't want them. They've cut this deal with Rwanda. UK courts have said, no, you can't do this, but they're trying to pursue it anyway. That people who wanted to go to the UK would be, in effect, kidnapped and shipped to Rwanda against their will. It's that kind of relationship that they have. So we see, again, there's an election approaching in Congo that's going to be held this month. But these elections are always very problematic. People cut deals. The winner turns into the loser. There's always this foreign interference involved, and the people of Rwanda suffer. There have been there's terrible loss of life over these years, and it's something that is not given enough attention. But I'm glad you brought it up in the context of Gaza. Gaza gets a lot of attention because it's under attack by Israel, by a U.S. ally. But there have been genocides all over the world, and the UN defines genocide. It's an effort to intentional harm of people. That can be killing. It can be taking children from the group. It can be a variety of harms to a group. And this definition goes back to 1948. So Gaza is just the latest genocide. Well, actually, I'm not going to say latest because that implies it's the only one. There's an ongoing genocide in Congo. I believe the interventions and invasions of the U.S. in Iraq or Libya can be called genocides too. So it's an ongoing problem, does not get enough attention, but that is, in very rough general terms, that's what's going on in Congo.
I'm curious about this, why would M23 rebels from Rwanda, why would they be willing to help out the United States in any way, shape, or form? And I ask that because I remember during Bill Clinton's presidency, one of the things that he said later on was that he regrets not helping people in Rwanda. Remember, there was the Rwanda genocide as well. Right. So why would they be willing to help the country that basically abandoned them when they needed them?
Well, they get paid. They're paid off by Rwanda. They're paid off by Uganda. So they're armies for hire is what they are. And so they're not representative of the people in these countries who suffer under these dictatorships. Rwanda, the president of Rwanda, Kagame, is a dictator. The U.S. keeps him in power. Dissidents are jailed or killed or disappeared. He assassinates people all over the world. So a Rwandan can be someplace else on the planet and end up dead. Those are the president of Uganda, he quote unquote wins every election. It's the same thing. They get millions of dollars from the U.S. And so these are armies that are hired by them. And they keep them in power. They destabilize Congo, this huge country. It's bordered, I think, by 9 different nations with all of these riches. The U.S. wants a destabilized Congo. They don't want a Congo that has peace. They want a Congo that remains weak, and Uganda and Rwanda and M23, who are under their direction, make sure that happens.
So what happens to the people in the Congo? Because one of the things that Human Rights Watch said is that some of these people are also being displaced. Where are they supposed to go?
Nobody cares. No one cares where they go. If they end up homeless in Congo, if they end up as refugees in another part of the country or in another country, they don't care. It's like that's something it has in common with Gaza, where Israel will claim, flee to this place, it's safe, and then they bomb the place where people have fled to. No one cares what happens to the people of Congo. That's of no concern to these forces that I mentioned. The civilians have suffered for decades under these interventions and invasions that happen at the behest of more powerful people.
So again, this is another situation that goes back to resources. Why do you feel the U.S. government, because it's not just the U.S., but it seems like we're the ones that do it the most. Why do you feel the U.S. government is so, hell bent on capturing these resources, and particularly in these countries in Africa? We did talk about this a couple of months that France also was taking resources from Niger. So is this a sign? Is this a message to the American people that the United States doesn't have resources or doesn't have enough resources?
The U.S. just wants to control them wherever they are. You remember there was a coup in Bolivia a few years ago, and Bolivia has a huge deposits of lithium. And remember, Elon Musk said, "We'll coup who we want," because obviously, being in the business of building electric cars, he needs lithium. Well, he came out and said the quiet part out loud. They being corporations, U.S. corporations, European corporations, some Chinese corporations, they want to have access. They want the cheap labor. Congo has its, not just Congo, but all over the world, there's something they call artisanal mining, which is a horrible term because it sanitizes this horrible process whereby anyone with a bucket and a shovel can go and mine for gold or diamonds or cobalt or coltan or copper or anything. People are paid starvation wages. We have child labor. There was a viral video last year showing men in Congo in a gold mine who'd been trapped when there was a landslide, and they were just being pulled out one by their fellow workers. They all managed to survive, but a lot of people don't. And this artisanal mining, that's what they want. They want to have easy access. They want the cheap labor. They don't want a strong government that makes demands, that nationalizes or insists on production being taken place in that country. So it's not purely extractive. They want a destabilized country. It makes their lives easier and they get what they want cheaply.
So there was actually an interview recently on Breakthrough News where they made the comparison between what's happening in the Congo and what's happening in Gaza. And this gentleman here had an interesting point. I want to play this.
We understand that the same oppression that's happening in Palestine has also some roots in the DRC. So if we look at, for example, the Israeli billionaire, Dan Gertler, who's made his billions of exploiting the Congolese people, some of the money that is made out of DRC has been used to build settlements in the occupied territories of Palestine. Most people don't even know that, right? His lawyers who represented him to put pressure on the Biden administration to remove U.S. sanctions on him. That lawyer, I think his name is Alan, I forgot how to mention his last name, is the same lawyer who defended Donald Trump during the impeachment. Right, and I can go on and on in speaking about the same oppression, but what I've noticed that's being lost in the discussion when I'm comparing Prime Minister Netanyahu to Rwandan President Paul Kagame. These two politicians, right, are committing crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, and no one is holding them accountable. Right? When I'm thinking about the occupation of lands in different parts of the DRC.
So he's basically saying that even when it comes to what's happening in the Congo, he's saying that Israel also has involvement with this as well when it comes to building the settlements.
Yeah, well, his name is Kambale Musavuli. He's Congolese and quite knowledgeable commenter on the situation there. But this man he refers to, and I'm getting his name Gerstler, I'm sorry, I should just leave his name out, very wealthy Israeli, who's made a lot of money in the Congo. And that's just what I'm talking about. So he can do anything he wants with his money. But of course, being an Israeli, he wants to build up Israel's settlement system. So we have these connections with wealthy people all over the world, determining what happens to people in far-flung places. So you may live in Congo, your life can be ruined because there's an Israeli guy who makes money in this mining business. He uses the money to build settlements in Israel, which displace the Palestinian people. So you see these, and it's money, follow the money, it's capitalism. And that's how it works to the disadvantage of, in this case, people in the Congo and people all over the world.
So after they declare that there is a Human Rights Watch actually declare there's a genocide or humanitarian crisis, then this seems to escalate to the UN at some point. But one of the questions that I've had is, what does the UN actually do other than make a statement? I've seen multiple journalists and commentators actually talk to the UN in person. Of course, Danny Haifong was one of them that talked to them in person. But then I always wonder, like, what happens after those talks? Like, what can the UN do in reference to these humanitarian crises, particularly a genocide? When can they step in, and why aren't they stepping in?
Well, the UN is, it's toothless. It's, first of all, the U.S. plays an outsized role in running the United Nations. So they never want to cross the United States. Now, you may have noticed that the UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, he's been on tour a lot for the last 2 months talking about UNF killed in Gaza and people killed in Gaza. But he never says who's doing the killing. He never says that Israel bombed a UN relief agency building. He never says that relief agency staff have been killed by Israel. Never, ever. So the UN is this toothless agency, and the system, it needs to be revamped totally. So we have this system of a Security Council, the permanent members, the 5 countries who were the victors in World War II, US, Britain, France, China, and then the Soviet Union, now Russia. Any one of those 5 can veto any resolution that's passed by the larger body. So the US, in the example of Israel, always defends Israel, always. Anytime there's a resolution criticizing Israel for any reason, the US will veto. So you have this political gamesmanship, and sometimes Russia and China will do the right thing in countering the US, and sometimes, there's backroom dealing. So that's how, unfortunately, how the UN really works. It doesn't want to use the power it has. It has the power of a bully pulpit, of public persuasion. But you have this Guterres, the current Secretary General, who will go on and on about how many UN relief workers have been killed and not say who killed them. Your viewers should go look at his tweets, and somebody's always like, well, who killed them? He'll tell this heart-rending story about this or that person who died, who was a great UN worker, but never say how they died. Never say they died in an Israeli bombing. And so that's the United Nations. It's a very weak, although until it comes to controlling the governments of Black people. So Haiti, the UN just picked a prime minister for Haiti. So this prime minister, Ariel Henry, was not elected by the people. The last president was assassinated. Henry has been implicated in the assassination of the last president, and this core group, the US, France, Canada, the UN, they picked a prime minister for Haiti. So when it comes to upholding imperialism, when it comes to controlling the destinies of Black people, they will leap into action in some terrible way. So they there's a UN resolution calling for the US, speaking of backroom dealings, paid off Kenya. Kenya is supposed to lead this police force to fight the gang problem in Haiti. Now, the gang problem in Haiti is controlled by US-controlled oligarchs in Haiti. So the US has its dirty hands, and Haiti doesn't need another intervention. Every intervention, every occupation has been a disaster for the people of that country. But the US doesn't want a strong Haiti. They do not want a Haitian government that is self-determining, that acts on in the interests of its people. So these gangs have guns, military-grade weapons. Well, how do they get to Haiti? Who controls the ports in Haiti? The Haitian oligarch class. But the US will pay Kenya off, and they need a Black face for this. So they get a Black country and some Caribbean nations as well to agree to lead the next occupation of Haiti. And the UN will do that. But when it comes to acting on behalf of people, fighting against imperial interests, then it's shoulder shrugs and people died, but nobody ever says who killed them.
That's interesting. What do you think this could mean in reference to countries that are part of BRICS? So like recently, I just saw that Putin did meet with the Prince of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is an ally of the United States. Do you foresee any of these countries, particularly China, since they also have a vested interest in Africa? Some people have said that China actually is helping Africa. I've also heard that some of the Africans actually do not want China in their countries. Do you feel that any of these countries that are part of BRICS could intervene in some way, shape, or form when it comes to African countries?
They can, and they have. Now, it's interesting, Saudi-U.S. relations are strained at the moment. Just a reminder, a few years ago, the Crown Prince, the de facto ruler, is known as MBS, Mohammed bin Salman. He had carried out an assassination of a dissident, Mr. Khashoggi. And as a result, it was created a PR problem for the United States. Yeah, the United States doesn't care who Saudi Arabia killed. But at any rate, that was the beginning of a problem. Last year, one of the unforeseen consequences of this U.S. determination to sanction Russia and say you can't buy Russian oil, and which of course disrupted the oil market. So the U.S. solution was to tell the Saudis to pump more oil and bring the price down. The Saudis were like, no, we're not going to cheat ourselves out of money. And the Biden administration, being who they are, created this rift with a country that the U.S. had been allied with since the days of World War II. So they're less close than they used to be. China has now emerged as a diplomatic leader in the world. Xi Jinping went to Saudi Arabia, great pomp and circumstance, met with Prince MBS. China and Russia are like this, they're best friends. So now there's a different axis of power, and the Saudis are now closer to the Russia and China axis in the world. So yes, the BRICS are, it's a possibility. The most important thing the BRICS want, they want to get rid of dollar domination. And that's why the number of nations, it was Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Now they've invited other nations to join and accepted other nations who want some protection from U.S. power to sanction their countries, for example. So yes, to answer your question, this is a possibility for new players to come on the scene. I think it's just the beginning, though. I don't think there's going to be de-dollarization or anything anytime soon. But these relationships have been made much worse by the Biden administration and their foreign policy decisions, which have even hurt countries that the U.S. has already been friendly with, like Saudi Arabia.
Where does South Africa fit in all of this? Because you would think, I mean, South Africa, they're there in Africa. They have actually spoken out in reference to the genocide in Gaza. They've been very public about that. But I haven't heard them say anything in reference to what's happening in the Congo.
I believe that they do. You know, South Africa has played a role mediating other disputes. There was an U.S. instigated civil war in Ethiopia the last couple of years. The U.S. instigated the Tigray region to seek, quote unquote, independence, a terrible war with all the devastation to civilians that we've been talking about. South Africa played a part in brokering that peace. South Africa, though, has a problem in that the white minority still run the country. They're the ones with the money. They're the ones who still own the gold mines. So you have Black leadership that's in kind of a tenuous position. Even when they want to act independently, they do have to be careful. So South Africa is, you know, when I was young, it was Free South Africa. I guess you can still say Free South Africa because it's still controlled by capital.
One of the things that they mentioned also in this article is they said between October 2022 and January 2023, Human Rights Watch interviewed in person and by phone 48 survivors and witnesses of abuse, as well as victims, family members, local authorities, activists, UN staff, security personnel, members of armed groups, journalists, and foreign diplomats. And it says a 30-year-old woman said she was at home in Kesheev with her husband and her 3 children on November 29th when a group of M23 fighters kicked the door open. They took my husband and our son by force outside and told me, stay in the house. If you come out, we will kill you. So I closed the door behind them. They shot them a few meters away. I could see them through a hole in the door. Her husband was seriously injured, but survived. Their 25-year-old son died. And so this is another thing, too, where I feel like mainstream media they're not even talking about this at all.
No. Congo is old news. It got some attention some years ago. It was mostly about rapes, sexual assaults of women, without any context. So just, Black people are savage. Nothing about the U.S. role in backing M23 or backing Uganda or Rwanda. And I'm going to digress a little bit here. We keep hearing about all these rapes on October 7th, but you don't see any names. Every time you see a story about sexual assaults or abuse or murders in Congo, you have a name, you have an age, people come forward, they go on the record. And in the case of Israel, it's just stories repeating themselves without any kind of the records one would think you would have for such a serious topic, which bears being investigated. But, this has been going on decade after decade, and this kind of suffering of ordinary people who, despite the fact that their country sits on these riches, are very poor, that the world intervenes to make sure they do not have governments who work on their behalf. That is what's been happening in the Congo. I'm glad it gets attention, but even when it does, if these powerful countries side with the forces that are oppressing people, it doesn't really amount to very much.
What do you think all this means for President Biden going into November 2024? Because it's under Joe Biden, we now have 2 wars, a genocide, and just his foreign policy decisions have been absolutely terrible, which I think many of us on the left predicted that would happen anyway, because we just knew how Joe Biden was. But what do you think this means for him? Right now, they're saying that Donald Trump is beating him in the swing states. There's fear because there's third party and independent candidates that are running that have name recognition. So obviously they're talking about that as well. But going into 2024, do you think that Joe Biden is going to win? And do you think that the foreign policy decisions are what's going to hurt him the most?
I think he could win, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he lost. People are concerned about his age, and I think rightfully so. I don't want an 80-year-old, or did he just turn 81? Is it? Anyway, he's 80 at least. Running the country, he clearly, when he first ran in 2020, he was showing signs of cognitive decline then. He managed to win mostly because of antipathy to Trump. They coalesced around him. They raised $1 billion for him. People who did not feel enthusiastic about Hillary Clinton were enthusiastic about getting rid of Trump. And so he was able to win popular vote and electoral college vote, although it was closer than it should have been. I believe Trump got 10 million more votes than he got the first time. But Biden just, Trump's being such a polarizing figure, I think got a lot of people out to vote. But people had hopes of something different. And what did they get? Did we get Build Back Better? No, we didn't. The COVID era emergency relief programs, they're gone. They're just gone. People have been kicked off of SNAP, kicked off of Medicaid. Remember that we were going to get $2,000, a measly $2,000. And then they said, well, you already got $600. So 1,400 plus 600 equals 2,000. So you did get $2,000. Crushed the railroad workers' strike. Do you remember that? Now he's running around calling himself a pro-union president, going on a picket line with the United Auto Workers. I was like, wait a second, dude. When you had a chance to side with workers, you sided with the railroad companies to make sure they could not strike.
Yeah.
And people, this is not lost on people. And I can't believe they're actually focusing on what they call Bidenomics, acting as though his people are doing well. And then you have these, these operatives and propagandists saying, well, people they don't understand how good the economy is. So, we need to make the better point. You are doing better. It's so insulting to me. It's kind of funny, but also insulting. People are struggling. Millions of people are struggling. And they would be struggling less if those COVID era programs were still there. But you can't get rid of that and then say, oh, people are just stupid. They don't understand how wonderful Biden's been. So he is a weak president. I mean, he is literally a weak president. I don't know when he's aware of what's going on. He also is a man who, I mean, listen, nobody ever said Joe Biden was really smart. I mean, he's been around forever. He was first elected to the Senate in the 70s. He's been a public figure for 50 years. He was vice president. Did anybody ever say, Biden, he's scary smart? No one ever says that about him because he's not smart. On foreign policy, he lives in the distant past, thinking that the U.S., if they spent enough money, could dislodge Russia from Ukraine, as if Russia wouldn't try to defend their interests in a country right next door, blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. Of course, they did it. I'm going to say it. I think Seymour Hersh made a convincing case that the U.S. are the ones who did that. Remember he said they were going to turn the ruble to rubble? Russia's economy is stronger now than it was before the U.S. planned to sanction Russia. He can't even be trusted. Xi Jinping they had to beg Xi Jinping to talk to him, to meet with him. What does he do? When they say, so do you think Xi Jinping's a dictator? He says, yes, again. He was like, I don't know if you saw the video of the look on Blinken's face as the camera on Blinken when he said that. It was quite funny to me. So people domestically aren't better off. The situation with Israel is something most people do not like. Now, there's a range of opinion, but I think most Americans want a change in U.S.-Israel policy. Most Americans do not like the idea that their money is going to kill civilians in Gaza. Yeah. Do not. And this is his approval rating was already low. I mean, you're an incumbent president and your approval rating was only 40%. Now it's less. It's in the high 30s. But so he's a weak president in many ways, with nothing that he can point to say, I did this for the American people. People are better off because of this thing that I did. Build Back Better was it, but he couldn't get that done. And so now you have people who are dispirited or cynical, who, for all their efforts to get rid of Trump, now end up with this White House that doesn't act on their behalf domestically, which is screwing up internationally. So he's in trouble. Now it seems that Trump, despite all these efforts to keep him from running, all these charges against him, and I think most of these cases are BS, or they could be handled some other way, but they're hoping to keep Trump from running, but Trump is Trump, and so he is running. And according to polls, he's the most popular Republican. Most Republicans, the rank and file, want him. So Biden could be running against Trump again after a weak first term. So he can lose. I don't want to say whether, because I'm not sure, frankly, whether he would win or lose. But it says a lot about this country, and it's not very good that he's the nominee currently at all. And they're afraid of any competition. They've said there aren't going to be any debates. And they're going to try to hide him for as long as they can in order to crown him the nominee. Of course, we have this, and we always have to talk about this rigged process in the Democratic Party. The what are they called? The delegates, the elected officials who are delegates.
Super delegates.
Thank you so much. The super delegates, which basically undermine the will of voters. So you already have this crooked system that rigs the process in favor of the person that the oligarchs want, but it may not be enough to save Biden. And I've been saying for a while now, the winner of the election in November of 2024 will be Benjamin Netanyahu, because whoever it is going to be a Zionist. So regardless of what the rest of us want.
Do you feel that's why RFK Jr. has the position that he has in reference to Israel and Gaza? He's repeating like AIPAC talking points, saying that Israel is not an apartheid state. Do you feel that's the reason why he has that position as well? Because he feels like you basically have to be a Zionist in order to win?
I think so, but he's not very smart. I mean, just to be blunt about it. So he doesn't even have any nuance. He's like all the way in. He's glommed himself onto this Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, this right-wing rabbi. And so on the one hand, he says he's going to have an independent foreign policy, no more wars. He would end the intervention in Ukraine. So that's, a lot of people like that. But I always say, well, wait a minute. What does that mean he always says unconditional, unquestioned support of Israel. So what good does it do? First of all, I don't believe he would end the support for Ukraine. I mean, if you don't stand up to the Zionists, are you going to stand up to the military industrial complex? No, you're not. So, he started off with, I think, some possibility. There are people who love him. I don't understand why, because there's this for me, this big inconsistency for someone who claims they want a different foreign policy, except for this one thing. I'll do the same thing that U.S. presidents have been doing since the late 40s. So that calls into question, to me, everything else he says. I think he gets a lot of support because of his views on vaccine mandates. The questions that many people had about COVID policy, about COVID itself, about the vaccines. There's a lot of anger about that, and he gets support there. Now he said he was running as a Democrat. Now he says he's running as an independent. My question about all of these candidates is, how are they going to get on the ballot? Do you have the money? Do you have the infrastructure, the organizing capacity to get on a ballot? So I don't know. It's always also interesting. There's some indication he would take votes from Trump. So he might not even take votes from Biden as predicted. But it's all in flux. We have an incumbent president, but who's weak, and a former president who, despite the January 6th, despite the criminal charges, still has a reservoir of support who millions of people would vote for.
All right, Margaret, one more question for you. What can we do to make more people aware about these atrocities that are happening across the world? Of course, Israel and Gaza is receiving a lot of attention now in mainstream media, but what can we do to make more people aware about what's happening in places like the Congo?
We just have to talk about it as much as we can. The Black Agenda Report, we've done a lot of reporting over the years on Congo, on Haiti, opposing these U.S. interventions, calling them what they are, calling them genocides, calling, they say, what's the term, responsibility to protect. The U.S. is invading a country to help the people. And we always say, no, that is not true. We must do everything that we can to counter the prevailing corporate media state narrative. And we have to say that the corporate media narrative is the state narrative. If you look at the New York Times and what they say about Ukraine, it's like a State Department press release. How do you report on? The Times had a story recently about people who got out of prison to fight in Ukraine and some of them died. Okay, that's a legit story. But how do you not tell the story of Ukraine running out of men? They are conscripting young men and women. They are conscripting guys in their 50s. And Zelensky comes over here to meet with Biden, and nobody in corporate media says that that's true. So we have to use these platforms as much as we can. We have to be part of efforts to mobilize people. We just have to be very serious about our work, and we have it cut out for us. But the fact that, people are censored and deplatformed, it tells you how powerful we can be. They know if you can go on Twitter and give your I'm sorry, X, I keep saying Twitter, and give your point of view on something, that anybody in the world can amplify it. So we have to use these platforms while we can, as much as we can. And I think we have to center those parts of the world, those people, Africa, Haiti, places which are ignored, and we have to amplify them as much as we possibly can.
Margaret Kimberley, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's good to be back. Thank you.